And we are live, everybody. Welcome to our Thursday night digital discussions. My name is John Harry. I am the programs fellow at the Milwaukee County Historical Society. And boy, we have a great talk tonight about baseball in Milwaukee, which is something I know we're all missing. I did also just want to say that, of course, we are devastated by what happened in Minneapolis with George Floyd as a society, and kind of trying to find where our place in the conversation might be for that as a historical organization with a lot of resources about the activist history of Milwaukee and race relations in the city. So next week, we're actually partnering with a couple of the guys who represent the March on Milwaukee organization. So there was open housing marches in the late 1960s here in Milwaukee. And we're partnering with Adam Carr and Rob Smith from the March on Milwaukee organization to talk about the history of race relations in Milwaukee and kind of like how do we get to this point now. So next week at 7:30, same place, free talk right here on Facebook. We're going to tackle some pretty serious stuff because I think that's important in history, is to not gloss over that stuff too. And we as an organization, of course, believe that as well. So keep a lookout for the Facebook event on that. And it should be a really good discussion and with some really great information. And maybe we'll be able to learn something on how we can chart forward out of all this too. Tonight, though, we have something that's a little lighter to talk about. Which is kind of nice. But there's been diversity in baseball throughout Milwaukee's history too. So let's bring in our lead archivist, our speaker for tonight, lead archivist Kevin Abing. Kevin, welcome to our Thursday night digital discussion for the second time.
Thanks, John.
And we don't have to talk about the flu this time, which is great. So something, as we're looking at what the state of the world is in right now, and there's a lot of flashpoints going on. And I think the great thing about sports and baseball in particular is it's something that brings people together. So I think that's something that we can kind of look at tonight. We're missing this so much right now that we do not have our sports and our Brewers and the Bucks and whatever, going on right now. So we're going to talk some baseball tonight. So I'm going to tell you, Kevin, I've been tailgating for about 4 hours for this presentation. So it's all on you tonight. I'm just going to let you know that. I was like, I usually put on like a shirt and stuff. And I'm like, no, I can put on Brewers stuff tonight. I don't have an excuse to wear this stuff as much right now. So I'm excited to see the presentation, Kevin, and afterwards we're gonna have a Q&A. So if you have any questions, feel free to put those in the comments, and we'll get to a bunch of them afterwards. But without any further ado, up to the plate is Kevin Abing. Take it away.
Welcome, everybody. I'm very happy to do this talk for you tonight. I mean, as a baseball fan, I mean, we all have to feel cheated because of the whole COVID-19 pandemic. And I'm sure we're all just starved for anything related to baseball. I mean, the other night I found myself watching the 1965 All-Star game, for God's sake. So, I mean, you just try to find anything to take your mind off the current situation. And this talk, it's a poor substitute for the real thing, but I hope you enjoy this look back at pro baseball in Milwaukee. So to begin, anytime you deal with baseball, you have to start with opening day, and here is some film footage of the Milwaukee Brewers from 1938, and you can see a good-sized crowd, and of course you have to have the marching bands marching across the field. You see a little some game action here, and somebody, I can't think of I didn't see a roster, so I don't know who number 20 is for the Brewers, who just cranked a home run here. But what's baseball without some peanuts? Got to have that. And again, the marching band. And you can see the crowd, the stands are full. And of course, you have to have a nice cold beer. She seems to have a drinking problem, but that's okay. It's opening day. So what else are you going to do here? Now, just to provide a little background here, baseball made its first appearance in Milwaukee in the 1850s. And before too long, I mean, the game, it just really caught on, exploded, and it seemed everybody was playing. And of course, it was played at all sorts of different levels here in Milwaukee. The industrial leagues were really big. I mean, it seemed like every business had a team of its own. And then, of course, the kids are played a lot too. I included this picture because the manager in the back there, he named this team after a mine that he was involved with in Nevada. But the real reason I included this photo is this young guy here on the far left. His name is George Devine. And there might be some of you out there that might remember him as being the proprietor of the $1 Million Ballroom at the Eagles Club in Milwaukee. And of course, all the schools had their teams as well. So again, everybody was playing baseball. Now, I put this in here because this falls under the some things never change category. If you can read this letter, you can see that's two businesses challenging each other, to a friendly game of ball. But what really caught my eye with this letter was what was at stake, and that was the losing nine has to pay for the beer. So it reminds me a lot of our softball playing days, and if not having to buy the beer, that's a lot of incentive to do the best you can. So, and okay, now I had to include this photo, even though this guy, he just had a very fleeting connection to Milwaukee baseball. And my guess is that he took a few too many fastballs to the head, so he decided to switch things up. But well, if you ask me, he's risking a lot more batting this way. This gentleman's name was Johnny Price, and he played shortstop very briefly for the Brewers in 1945. But then he also actually played in the major leagues for a very brief time with Cleveland in 1946. So his baseball career didn't really amount to much, but he did gain a certain amount of notoriety by doing stunts like this, and he could actually hit line drives standing on his head. But I guess one of his more famous routines was that he could hold 3 baseballs in one hand and pitch from the pitcher's mound and have all 3 baseballs go, land in a catcher to 3 different catchers and land in their mitts, all within the strike zone. So you would think that, having those kinds of skills, he'd be able to, have a decent baseball career, but he made his name doing things like this. All right, so now on to pro baseball in Milwaukee. And Milwaukee got its first taste of pro baseball with this group, the Cream City Ballclub. It was organized in 1865, and they played their games at what used to be military camps during the Civil War. There's Camp Scott, which was located on what is now the Marquette University campus. And they also played at Camp Reno, or also known as Camp Siegel, on the east side on Prospect Avenue. And you have to love the hats and the bow ties. I think Major League Baseball should bring that back. It would add a real touch of class to everything, but what are they going to do? So now this ball club, for the most part, they played amateur teams, and they did very, very well. But every now and then they would play a professional ball club, and the results were a little different. For example, in one game against the Cincinnati Red Stockings, the Cream City Nine, they got edged out by the score of 85-7. So it's pretty clear that they weren't ready for prime time yet. And so, by 1876, this team had disbanded, and so they're replaced by this ball club, the West End Club, as the main ball club in Milwaukee. And they're called that, as you might expect, because they played on the city's West End, which at that time which at that time was on Wells Street and around like 32nd and Wells. And I mean, this ball club in 1878, they had a pretty decent season, on the field and at the gate. They attracted decent crowds, and it was that success that kind of spurred people on to have Milwaukee join the major leagues. And that team was called the Grays because of the color of their uniforms. And I mean, they actually had a couple of players from this West End club, but they also signed other professional players as well. But that first season in the major leagues, it was a disaster. The club had a dismal record of 15-44, and they dropped out of the league pretty quickly, and the team relocated to St. Louis. So it's not until 1884 that Milwaukee once again had a professional baseball team in the minor leagues, though. And so, I mean, here you see some photos of players from the 1888 Milwaukee team that played in the Western Association. And up until 1900, Milwaukee teams, they played in a variety of different minor leagues and even some major leagues. Like they were in the Northwest League or the Union Association or the Western Association or the Northwestern Association and the American Association. So they kind of bounced back and forth between major and minor league teams. And in the 1880s, the Milwaukee teams, they played at a ballpark that was located at 11th and Wright Streets. And then in the 1890s, they played here in the old Lloyd Street ballpark, which is at Lloyd and 16th and 17th Streets. And I like this picture a lot because if you could look closely at the outfield wall, you can see kids peering through knot holes in the fence to watch a free ball game or so. Now, one of the star players on the 1888 Milwaukee team was their pitcher, Clark Griffith. And he went on to own, after his playing career was over, he went on to own the Washington Senators for many, many years. And then his family owned the Senators, and then which became the Minnesota Twins for a long, long time. Now, in the 1890s, there's another very influential figure in baseball history that made his mark in Milwaukee. And this is a composite photo of the 1897 Milwaukee team. And the person that I want to focus on was this guy, Connie Mack, who at that time, he was the team's catcher, he was their manager, and he was their co-owner. But he really made a name for himself after he left Milwaukee, because he became the owner and manager of the Philadelphia Athletics and held that position for like 50 years. And I'd be willing to bet everything I have to say that there's no one is ever going to break that record for the managerial longevity. It's just never, ever going to happen. Now, here is a photo of the Republican House Hotel, which was located on 3rd Street. It used to be directly across the street from where the Historical Society is today. And this hotel was the location of a very, very important event in Major League Baseball history, because it's in room 185 of the Republican Hotel, where Connie Mack, Charles Comiskey, Van Johnson, and two Milwaukeeans, an attorney, Henry Killalay, and his brother Matthew, they met and they formed the American League to rival or challenge the National League as a major league franchise or league, I guess. And so that that was in 1900, and for the 1901 season, that first season for the American League, Milwaukee actually had a team. However, they didn't play very well. They didn't draw very well. And so they relocated after only 1 year, and they moved to St. Louis to become the St. Louis Browns. So starting with the 1902 season, Milwaukee is back to fielding a minor league team, and known as the Milwaukee Brewers. And for the next 50 years, the Brewers played games at this ballpark here. It was built in 1888. It was called Athletic Field, but everybody remembers it as Borchert Field. And it was located between Burleigh and Chambers and 7th and 8th Streets. And as you can see in this aerial view, this photo was taken about 1925. And as you can see in this view, I mean, the ballpark, I mean, it encompasses just a square city block. And because of that configuration, it offered made for some very interesting challenges for the players, especially the foul lines were only 266 feet from home plate. So, I mean, you talk about some cheap home runs. I mean, at Borchert Field, it was a bandbox, basically. And it was a real intimate setting. I mean, the maximum capacity was like 10,000 people, but every now and then they did cram in some, standing room only crowds of like 17,000 people. But one of the interesting things about Borchert Field, as I mentioned, it offers some weird, configurations. This straightaway center was 395 feet away. But the power alleys, if you look at that, I mean, they were much, much deeper. So, if you tried to pull something into left center, I mean, you had to hit it a long, long way to get it out of the ballpark here. Now, this is a shot of the 1904 Milwaukee Brewers. And really, I mean, for the first half of the 20th century, the Brewers were, they were really one of the most successful minor league teams in the country. I mean, all told, they won about 8 American Association pennants. And they drew, decent-sized crowds. This is a shot outside the stadium from 1909. So you can see this pretty large crowd waiting to get in. And I don't know if you can see right there, but the ticket price is 25 cents. They have those days back again, right? I mean, a quarter won't get you anywhere near a major league ballpark these days. Now, this is a photo of the 1913 Milwaukee Brewer team. And this was the first year that the Brewers won the American Association Championship. And one of the players on this team, he's not pictured with the team because he joined, I think, a little bit later. But one of the players on this team was a Milwaukee native called Oscar Happy Felsch. And Oscar, he went on to have a pretty decent major league career until he decided to help throw the World Series in 1919 as a member of the Chicago White Sox. And so he, along with 7 other players, were banned for life from Major League Baseball. So that didn't end very well for Happy, but honestly, I think he came back to Milwaukee. I believe he owned a saloon, and he was perfectly happy with that. So now, in case you're wondering, and I get asked this every time I give this talk about the goat down here. The goat's name was Fatima, and she belonged to the pitcher holding her, it was Ralph Cutting, and Fatima became like the team mascot in 1913. It must have been a good luck mascot because they won the championship that year. And I like to think that this was the goat that put the curse on the Chicago Cubs. But I guess I can't say that anymore, unfortunately. And again, here you see, after they clinched the pennant, they were given a huge parade in downtown Milwaukee. And so, they were really doing well on the field and at the gate. And they repeated as American Association champions in 1914. And I included this photo because it's just kind of an interesting view of the crowd leaving after the game. And they're just strolling across the field, to get to the exit that they want. Boy, you would never ever see that in a game today. Now, in 1920, the gentleman on the left, Otto Porter, was part of a group that purchased the Brewers, and eventually he became the sole owner of the team. And Porter, he was one of these really gregarious people who he loved being at the ballpark. He loved interacting with the fans. And here you see Borchardt here off to the right, right there, with some 5,000 of his closest friends on Kids Get In Free Day. Now the Brewers teams in the 1920s, they weren't a powerhouse in the American Association by any means, but they did send a number of pretty good ball players to the major leagues. There was Joe Hauser, who was the first professional baseball player to hit 60 home runs. He did it in the minor leagues, but hey, it's 60 home runs, which is still pretty incredible feat. And he did go on to have a decent career with the Philadelphia Athletics. But the most successful of the players from the Brewers was this gentleman, Aloysius Szymanski, better known as Al Simmons. Simmons was a Milwaukee native, and he was known as the Duke of Mitchell Street before he was sold to the Philadelphia Athletics in 1923 for the grand total of $42,000, which was a pretty good chunk of change back then. Well, you compare it to Babe Ruth was sold to the Yankees for $100,000. So it's a decent amount of money that was involved. And Simmons went on to have a Hall of Fame career with the A's and with the Chicago White Sox. Now, there's one other team that I want to mention that played at Borchardt Field in 1923, and that's the Milwaukee Bears of the Negro National League. The Bears were only around for just a part of one season, so they didn't last very long at all. And unfortunately, we don't have any photos of the team or individual players. And so I implore people that if you know of anybody who does have photos of any of those players or that team, please let me know. I would be absolutely thrilled to add those photos to our collection. It would be like finding the Holy Grail, basically. Now, here's another shot of Simmons on the left with Babe Ruth in October of 1928. Ruth was on a barnstorming tour and stopped in Milwaukee on this date. And the player on the right was another Milwaukee native named George McBride, who was a longtime outfielder with the Washington Senators. But he also played on that original Milwaukee team in the American League in 1901. And when McBride died in 1973, he was the last surviving player from that 1901 Brewers team. Now, the Brewers, they didn't win another pennant until this team won the championship in 1936. And they sent a number of players on to the to the major leagues. Rudy York had a really good career with the Tigers. Milwaukee native Chet Labs and played with the St. Louis Browns. There was Garland Braxton, who pitched for Washington, and Luke Hamlin, who pitched for the Dodgers. So they were a pretty talented group. And I like to include this photo because of the gentleman on the far right here. His name, he was the team's trainer. His name was George Washington Buckner. And, it's just kind of interesting that, blacks, weren't allowed to play, in professional baseball, but they could be allowed to be a trainer for a team. So, okay. Now this is a shot of the 1943 Milwaukee Brewers. And this, another very good team. They finished in first place, but they ended up losing in the playoffs. So they didn't win the championship. But the reason I include this photo is because the gentleman in the back row on the far right, who was the team owner at that time, who's Bill Beck, he was the P.T. Barnum of baseball. He pulled all kinds of stunts. His most famous was sending a midget up to bat for the St. Louis Browns in 1951. But when he was with the Brewers, he did all sorts of things to try to get fans into the stands. He'd have all sorts of giveaways with some really weird prizes, like a 200-pound cake of ice or a keg of nails. He gave away fruits and vegetables, even old livestock, horses and goats and chickens and rabbits, that kind of thing. So he did pretty much anything and everything to try to get the people into the stands. During World War II, he had the Brewers play games in the morning so that workers from the late shift, factory workers from the late shift, could come to games. And he'd have the ushers, they would be in their pajamas, handing out donuts and breakfast cereal to people. So it's it must have been a real interesting time to go to Brewer games at that. And Beck, he wasn't above a little chicanery to help the Brewers win. For example, I mentioned how the foul lines, just 266 feet down, the foul lines there. And so what he did is that he had a 60-foot screen made out of chicken wire that he put along the right field foul, the right field seats to prevent the opposing players from hitting cheap home runs, down the line. However, whenever the Brewers came up to bat, he had this like a hydraulic motor that would retract that fence, and the Brewers would just be bombing away, yanking home runs down the right field line, left and right. Needless to say, the very next day, the American Association, they made it a rule to forbid that from ever happening, and but it worked once, and I guess that was all that mattered to Beck. Now the Brewers, the 1944 team, also finished in first place, but again lost in the playoffs, and they were managed by Hall of Famer Casey Stengel, and a lot of people consider that 1944 team one of the best minor league teams ever. So the Brewers had a lot of talent at that time. Now the Brewers, they weren't the only first top-notch ball club that played at Borcher Field in 1944. A lot of people forget that Milwaukee had a team in the All-American Girls Professional Ball League. It was the Milwaukee Chicks. I'm sure you couldn't get away with that, a name like that today. But the Milwaukee Chicks won the league title. They beat the Kenosha Comets to win the title. Here you see a photo of the Chicks, the pitching staff with their manager, Max Carey, who was a longtime outfielder with the Pittsburgh Pirates. And the Chicks, though they played great on the field, they just never really had much support from the fans or from the press. And they tried to do all sorts of things, like having this Milwaukee Symphony play before games. But it just wasn't enough. And so after that 44 season, the team folded. It relocated to Grand Rapids, Michigan, and that was the end of Milwaukee's foray into women's baseball. Now, to get back to the Brewers, Lou Perini, who owned the Boston Braves in the National League, he purchased the Brewers from Beck in 1946. And by this time, Borchard Field, I mean, it's on its last legs. I mean, it's definitely showing in wear and tear. And so discussions begin to be held among city and county officials, as far as building a new ballpark. And there were several sites that were considered, but in the end, it was Story Quarry that was the favorite. And so on October 19th, 1950, ground was broken at Story Quarry for a new stadium. And here you see the stadium in December of 1951, and then April 1952, June of 52, and November of 52. So you can see it making a lot of progress. And you can also see some film footage of the stadium being built. I'm going to skip ahead here because, I mean, unless you're really into seeing concrete being poured, it's not all that exciting here. But let's see here. There you go. And okay, it's coming up here. Just seeing this whole sequence here, I mean, it just makes me really, really nervous just to watch this. They're raising one of the light stands, and boy, it just looks really precarious. I mean, and the people working there, I mean, they're some of the bravest people you can see here, because just watch this being very slowly being raised. And the footage is a little jumpy there, so I apologize for that. But eventually they have it raised, and then they have to secure it. And I mean, oh man, they're just lucky that there's not a stiff breeze blowing that day. Because that's just very dangerous kind of work. All right, now this whole building this stadium, I mean, it really was a kind of a field of dreams scenario. I mean, because people, that they have the stadium and they're figuring who's going to play there. And as with the field of dreams, the hope was that if they build it, a major league team would come. But by the spring of 1953, that hadn't happened yet. And so it's just assumed that the minor league Milwaukee Brewers were going to be playing here at the stadium. But I mean, it wasn't for a lack of trying to get a major league team here. I mean, the gentleman that you see here is Fred C. Miller from Miller Brewery, and he was behind an effort to try to bring the St. Louis Cardinals to Milwaukee. Of course, that didn't pan out. But then Bill Beck, who at this time owned the St. Louis Browns, threw his hat into the ring. He announced that he wanted to move the Browns to Milwaukee, which kind of poetic justice, I guess. Things coming full circle because the Browns started in Milwaukee. But Lou Perini, who owned the Brewers and the Braves, but he had the territorial rights to Milwaukee, and he nixed that Beck's effort right away. Now the other American League owners, I mean, they could have given Beck the green light to make that move, but they turned that down because it was pretty obvious that a lot of the American League owners, they just didn't really care for Beck very much and his eccentricities. So that didn't happen either. So with the Browns move shot down, things moved pretty fast. On March 13th of 1953, Lou Perini announced that it was his intention to move the Braves to Milwaukee. And apparently, Fred Miller, played a big part in convincing Perini to make that move. And it was a pretty easy decision for Perini, because attendance at the Braves games in Boston was dismal. For the entire 1952 season, they drew a grand total of 281,000 fans. So Perini, he's looking for greener pastures. And once he had the green light to move to Milwaukee, things moved fast. Milwaukee, Perini got the approval from the other National League owners, and so Milwaukee, they're back in the big leagues here. And unfortunately, Miller didn't have long to enjoy the fruits of his labor. He was killed in a tragic plane accident in 1954. So very, very sad. But the city, once they had the Braves, the city was ecstatic, and they welcomed the team with open arms. And you can see, women dressed up in their Braves regalia to welcome the team at the train station, or there had signs everywhere. This is on Wisconsin Avenue. The Milwaukee rolled out the red carpet for the Braves, and they treated the players like kings. Gave them free cars and you name it, and they were given it. It was like heaven for the Milwaukee players. And the Braves' first game at County Stadium was played on April 14th of 1953. Here you see, this is their ace pitcher, Hall of Famer Warren Spahn on the mound against the St. Louis Cardinals. And here you see shortstop Johnny Logan, who's a longtime favorite of Braves fans, at the plate. And I like this photo here just because you can get a really good view of that old ski jump that used to be on the hill up near the soldiers' home. So now the Braves in this 1953 season, they won this game 3-2 in 10 innings. And they went on to win 92 games in 1953, which was an improvement of 28 games from the previous season. And Perini, he definitely found his greener pastures. Because in 1953, the Braves, they set an attendance record. They drew 1.8 million fans. Then the following year, they topped that and went over the 2 million fan mark. So with the Braves at County Stadium, 1952 was the last year of baseball at Borchert Field. And the team was shifted and relocated to Toledo, Ohio. And Mrs. Borchert, who still owned the stadium and the property, she sold it to the city of Milwaukee. And by 1954, Borchert Field was dismantled. It was used as a playground until the I-43 freeway went through in 1963. So a sad end for a big part of Milwaukee baseball history. But things are pretty exciting for the Braves. Here you see some game action. This is against the Cubs in 1955. Ernie Banks at the plate here. And you can see, you look at the stands and they're absolutely packed. And it did not take long for the Braves to put together a really formidable team. On the far left, you have Joe Adcock at first base. Next to him is Hall of Famer Eddie Matthews at third. Outfielder Bobby Thompson. By this time, he's kind of on the downside of his career. But then on the far right, you have, to me, the real all-time home run champion, Hank Aaron, in the outfield. And on September 23rd, 1957, Aaron hits a home run in the bottom of the 11th inning against the Cardinals to clinch the National League pennant. And as you can see here, the fans went nuts. They poured down on Wisconsin Avenue. They filled it up from one side to the other. And they celebrated and partied quite a bit. And so they win the pennant, and they go on to meet the dreaded New York Yankees in the World Series. And this series, someone from the Yankees, and I've seen different accounts, so I'm not sure exactly who said it in the Yankees organization, but somebody criticized, Milwaukee newspapermen for acting what he called Bush League. And that became like a rallying cry for the city and for the team. And as you can see here, Bushville won the World Series in 7 games. And again, the crowd goes crazy. Let's see here. And the partying went on for a long, long time. And again, Wisconsin Avenue was jam-packed. And the champagne, and I'm sure the beer, flowed very freely in celebration of that. Now, the Braves, so they're world champions in 57. They repeat as National League champs in 1958. And again, they meet the Yankees in the World Series. And here you see some footage from Game 1. And again, I want to kind of skip ahead here. Hawking the newspapers, and the national anthem. But again, you can just see the stands. There's not an empty seat anywhere to be found. Of course, you got your celebrities, Hubert Humphrey from Minnesota. Well, it looks like, a beautiful day for a ball game. And Billy Bruton and Aaron. And let's see here. I want to skip ahead here. There's Mickey Mantle. And whoever shot this footage, they kept it on Mantle for pretty much the rest of the time here. And unfortunately, the Braves lost this game 4-3. And they ended up losing the series as well. And this is really the high watermark for the Braves in Milwaukee. They still were very competitive after this point, but the quality of the play declined a little bit, and attendance started to dwindle somewhat. They never had a losing season, but they weren't quite up to the par with these 57 and 58 teams here. New ownership took over in 1962. It was this conglomerate from Chicago, and almost immediately rumors start swirling that the team is going to be moving. And Atlanta made absolutely no bones about it that they wanted the Braves to move there. However, the owners, they denied it, that it wasn't going to happen. But only, at weeks after the 1964 season ended, these owners announced, hey, we are going to move. And we're moving to Atlanta for the 1965 season. Now, the tricky thing is that the Braves lease was not fulfilled for County Stadium. And so you have this very ugly fight, a divorce, if you will, that took place. Lawsuits are filed on both sides, but in the end, the Braves had to play the 1965 season at County Stadium. And, needless to say, the crowds were were nowhere near what they used to be, because it was a lame duck season for the Braves. And this, to me, is one of the saddest photos for Milwaukee baseball fans that you'll ever see. You got Aaron and Matthews heading into the clubhouse for the very last time. And the players, they didn't want to leave. As I mentioned before, I mean, they were treated like kings in Milwaukee, and they didn't want to go. But the deal was done, and the Braves, they moved out for the '66 season, and which left a huge void in Milwaukee, among baseball fans. And so for the next few years, I mean, the only professional baseball in Milwaukee was, I mean, they resorted to looking to the Chicago White Sox to hold what they called home games in Milwaukee for the '68 and '69 seasons. And here you see this knuckleball pitcher Wilbur Wood, who's giving some tips to some very confused fans in Milwaukee. So, I mean, as I said, there's just this huge void among baseball fans in Milwaukee. And Bud Selig was, part of this group that was desperately trying to get Major League Baseball back to Milwaukee. I mean, they tried to get an expansion team, but they lost out in 1969 to Montreal. Then they tried to buy the White Sox, and that fell through too. But they were eventually, this group was able to purchase the Seattle Pilots, who from the American League. And Seattle, I mean, they'd only been around for 1 year, but they drew dismal crowds, and so they were ready to move. And Bud and the others, they swooped in, they bought the team, and they didn't get final approval for the purchase until March 31st of 1970. I mean, you're talking days before the start of the season. And so, I mean, the team is scrambling to get ready. I mean, they wouldn't have uniforms in time. So what they did, they ripped off the Seattle off the front of the old uniforms, and they stitch on Milwaukee. They did the same thing with the caps. They rip off the S and put the M on there. But they were ready for opening day, was April 7th, and things didn't go very well. I mean, they lost 12-0 to the Angels. But the Brewers, I mean, they were an expansion team, and so they struggled for several years. But they did have some pretty solid ball players. I mean, up here, you see George Scott, the Boomer, at first base. They had Don Money at third base, Darryl Porter, Dave May. I mean, so they had some decent ball players, but collectively, they didn't play very, very well. And so, so they're struggling. But brighter days are ahead when some kid named Robin Yount shows up and joins the team in 1974, leads the Brewers to their only World Series appearance in 1982. But alas, all good things must come to an end, and County Stadium was replaced after a bitter political fight and a tragic accident, replaced by Miller Park in 2001. I could go on talking, but you know how things turn out. So thank you everybody for listening, and I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.
Yeah, great presentation, Kevin. A lot of stuff I didn't know in there about just how involved Milwaukee has been in baseball for a long time. I think we have short-sightedness a lot with our place in baseball history, thinking, well, we had the Braves for a little bit, and then the Brewers since 1970, and that's kind of it. And then, there's a lot there. I went to the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown last summer. Have you been there, Kevin?
Oh yeah, not for a long time, but I got to get back. I have to get back.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you can't go this year, but like when stuff returns to normal-ish or whatever, you got to go to Cooperstown. But they have like the Milwaukee Chicks uniforms there from the female league. So I saw that last year. So if you have any questions, now is the time to ask. We got a few minutes for Kevin. You have this wealth of knowledge from our archivist at the Historical Society. So if you have any archivist questions or baseball questions, now's the time to ask. So just put them in the comments and we'll get to them. My question to start all this, though, is now, I guess I have kind of two. Nowadays, you have like you have like major league affiliations with minor league clubs. Did that exist with the first round of the Milwaukee Brewers?
No, I mean, the system was a lot different, in the early 20th century. Because there wasn't any formal affiliation between minor leagues and the major leagues. I mean, teams essentially, the major league teams, they would send scouts out, and if they saw a player that they, really liked, they would purchase that player from the minor league team. But it's really not until, Branch Rickey and the St. Louis Cardinals is credited with starting the modern minor league system where you have these farm teams, and it just kind of grew from there. So we'll stay on we've got some questions coming in, and we'll get to those in a second. So if you have more questions, please put them in the comments right now. But when I go to I've lived in cities that have minor league teams, and I go to minor league games, and they're not like, you don't pay attention. You know what I mean? Like, it's like you're there to have a beer and a brat and see this funny stuff between innings and whatever. Like, was minor league baseball in Milwaukee actively followed? Oh yeah, absolutely. Especially because the Brewers were such, for the most part, were a really, really good minor league team. And so they would draw crowds, and Borchert Field, the seating capacity wasn't very much to begin with, but I mean, they always drew decent crowds, and I mentioned with Bill Beck, all the crazy stunts that he pulled. I mean, that brought people in, and so yeah, it was followed, by Milwaukee fans, and I'm sure. When the Braves came, I mean, as happy as Milwaukee was to be in the major leagues, I'm sure that there was, probably some regrets to see the minor league Brewers, fold up and move to Toledo.
Well, so why did the Brewers? So Milwaukee was it has been for a long time a major city, and you have all these other major cities. Why did we not get a major league team until the 50s?
Well, I mean, that's a good question. I mean, there was only 16 major league teams, in the American and National Leagues total. And so, and honestly, I don't know how much, Milwaukee tried to get a major league team. I think by the time that the American League was formed, the National League was well established. You have those 8 teams in each league. It was just so entrenched that I don't know that there just there wasn't any room for expansion.
Sure.
And it really wasn't until the 50s that anybody even considered moving a team to a new location. And I mean, with the Braves moving to Milwaukee, that kind of set off this chain reaction because the Dodgers and the Giants in New York, they saw how well the Braves were drawing, and they thought, hey, we can get in on this. And so they moved to LA and San Francisco, and and that just kind of started this whole carousel, I guess, of teams moving whenever they felt like they needed to.
Sure. So I'm going to address one question first from Helen, and then we'll get into some baseball questions here. So yes, Helen, now would be a great time to talk about the civil rights protests in Milwaukee. We're doing it next week, actually. We have some experts on the March of Milwaukee next Thursday at 7:30. So Helen, please tune into that. Baseball will bring us together for tonight, and then we'll talk about that stuff next week. So thank you for bringing that up. So do you know who the Brewers? Edward wants to know when the Brewers came to Milwaukee, who was their manager?
Oh boy, that's that I could not tell you. So, did they mean the 1970 Brewers when they
Maybe he means Braves. Yeah. Maybe when the Braves came, or maybe either. Do you know who the Braves manager was, and then who the first Brewers manager was?
I think the Braves manager. I don't know if he was the first one, but I think Fred Hutchinson, and then Bobby Bragan, I think were managers as well. I'm not sure which of them came before the other, but for the Brewers, I am drawing a blank. I cannot think of who the first manager was.
Well, I can try to look it up here as you answer the next question. David is asking, how many games did the White Sox play in, I'm guessing in Milwaukee, in 68 and 69?
Yeah, it was just a handful of games, because obviously they didn't want to, take games away from, the fans at Comiskey Park. And so I think, I want to say no more than 10 games in each season. But the interesting thing is that I think that they drew better in Milwaukee than they did in Chicago. So
sure,
so there was an incentive for them to play games in Milwaukee.
That's interesting. That's how that went. And isn't there's a Beck connection to Chicago White Sox too, right?
Oh yeah. He was owner of the White Sox in the 70s.
Yeah, the disco riot.
Yeah. The legend lives.
Yeah, they were all about the publicity, right?
Oh yeah.
They ended up, I think, at the St. Paul Saints minor league team at some point. I lived in Minneapolis for a while. I heard anything like that. Okay. Randy is asking, as an archivist, how do you find and thread together pieces of history, in this case, baseball? So what's your method in putting a presentation like this together and finding all the pieces?
I mean, it's pretty easy, actually. I mean, because we have a pretty decent collection of material related to Milwaukee baseball. And I'm a huge baseball fan anyway, and so this was fun putting this presentation together, and it's just a matter of picking out things that photos and other things that I come across during my years at the society that I thought, this will be a nice addition to a presentation. So. It's an ongoing process because we get new stuff in all the time, and if I see something that fits in in baseball or any of the other presentations that I do, I'm quick to make sure I add that to the presentation.
Sure. So I looked it up. The first Brewers manager was Joe Schultz.
Oh. Yeah, because I knew he was the manager in Seattle, but I didn't know that he carried over to Milwaukee too.
He came over all the way, for a while. Yeah. So, that's pretty cool.
If anybody, if you want to read a great baseball book, Ball 4 by Jim Boughton about that 1969 Seattle team, Joe Schultz plays a very, very prominent role in that book. He was an interesting character, let me tell you.
Sure. All right. Let me just see here. Make sure I get through at least the questions. So the Brewers, the minor league Brewers, moved to Toledo. Are they the Toledo Mud Hens today?
I believe so.
Okay.
I couldn't say with 100% certainty, but I believe I don't think that Toledo ever lost a minor league team and then was reincarnated as the Mud Hens.
Sure. Yeah. And then. I'm just looking here, make sure that I get the ones that if there are a few that I can group together real quick. So this is, we're close to Chicago, which is, I know, unfortunate for everybody. But before 1953, before the Braves arrived, did the Cubs have much fan traction in Milwaukee for those that followed Major League Baseball?
Yeah. Even I have friends of mine who, they're not that old before, pre-Braves Milwaukee, but, when the Braves left Milwaukee, I mean, they turned to, to the Cubs.
Yeah.
And so it was only natural for those that were, interested in Major League Baseball. I mean, Chicago being as close as it was, that they'd either follow the Cubs or the White Sox.
Got it. Yeah. Okay. So now I'm looking because somebody corrected me on the Joe Schultz thing. Apparently he was fired from Seattle in 1969.
Okay.
So now I'm going to check this real quick. It's Dave Bristol. Okay. It's Dave Bristol.
Okay.
It was the first Brewers manager in 1970. There we go. Thank you, Michael, for bringing that one up there. All right, so 2 more questions we're going to take here because they're about our collections at Milwaukee County Historical Society. Because all the pictures and the stuff that you showed tonight is all stuff that we have in our collection at the Historical Society. And so the first one I'm going to take up is Jackie. She says, "Is there a place online or in person where we can access all these fantastic photos and videos?"
Well, I mean, they're not, they haven't been digitized or, and they're not available online. But I mean, people are more than welcome. Well, of course, with the pandemic and everything.
Hopefully soon, right?
Yeah, hopefully soon. But people are more than welcome to come into the Historical Society and, look through all this material. We're happy to make it available because there's a lot of really cool photos of, not just the major league, or minor league professional teams in Milwaukee, but also, with the industrial leagues and semi-pro baseball. So there's a lot to look through. So please, when we reopen, come on.
You can, we'll have a whole protocol in place so you can do it safe too.
Yes.
So, and you can also, for the, some of the pictures that you might like, that are especially some of these famous shots that you see, you can order reproductions for personal, if you want to hang them up in your bar at home or something like that, or, put them in your bedroom, whatever. I don't care what you do with it, but you can order those. That was a joke, Kevin.
Yeah.
So, but yeah. Okay. Last question, because we're always trying to find more pieces of Milwaukee history. So Chris says, other than Milwaukee Bears photos, what other prized historical memorabilia do you wish MCHS was in possession of?
Wow. Well, I mean, we got a pretty decent amount of Braves material, World Series programs and newspaper clippings and things like that. But I think, like the minor league Milwaukee Brewers would be something that we'd like to beef up. I mean, we do have, quite a few photos of Borchert Field, but I mean, it was just such an interesting ballpark that, I mean, we're always happy to take in any new images of Borchert Field. So, I mean, the minor league Brewers and again, any 19th century Milwaukee baseball material would be fantastic.
Absolutely. So, and a lot of people, when they're cleaning out, if a relative is deceased or something, they're cleaning out their attic and they'll find stuff and you don't throw it away. Let's just put it that way. Cause bring it in and we'll figure that out. So,
right. I mean, because you never know where things are going to come from. I mean, was it last year or the year before, a gentleman brought in, it was like a case of film footage that he just found on the sidewalk. And included in there was some shots from 1974 from the Brewers. There wasn't a lot of baseball action, but there was some shots of Robin Yount, playing Pepper before a game. And there was also, some, stunts. I think it was like the flying Walendas, walking across a tightrope, in County Stadium, things like that. And, and it's pretty cool footage. I mean, I'm not sure it was Carl Walenda who was actually doing the walking on the tightrope, but he dropped a baseball and Bob Uecker was, on the field to catch the baseball. And he's wearing this ooh, 1970s plaid jacket. It just makes you shudder to see it now. But it was just a really cool footage. And so, you never know when things are going to come in, and that's what makes this job so interesting.
Yeah, it's pretty cool to see what people can dig up. So cool. Well, hey, thanks, Kevin, for the great content tonight about Milwaukee professional baseball. And yeah, I know the world is a tough place right now, and we are not by any means moving past that at all. And especially with the marches going on and the response to police violence in Milwaukee, we're definitely paying attention to that and lining up our programming accordingly. So next Thursday, same time, 7:30. We've got Rob Smith, who's a history professor at Marquette, and Adam Carr, who's an independent journalist in the city. And they work with the March in Milwaukee organization to commemorate those open housing marches that took place in 1967 and 68. And so next week, Thursday, we're going to be tackling that. To make sure that we understand the history behind what's happening in the world today. So make sure, if you enjoyed this, to tune in next week. It's gonna be a free presentation on our Facebook page once again. So all you got to do is tune in, and we'll have a good discussion, I hope. So about some really tough issues, but things that I think we need to deal with. So we're just getting ready for that. So Kevin, once again, thanks a lot. Hopefully we can all have a beer at a baseball game sooner rather than later. But not holding my breath till next year. But have a great weekend, everybody, and we'll see you next Thursday when we talk about the March in Milwaukee. Cheers.